Hey there guys, my name is Tradgik, and for those of you who don't know me, I live, work, and game within Moncton, New Brunswick, Canada, and today we're going to be doing a tier list for Resident Evil. So as some of you may know, I used to be a speedrunner for Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil 2 Remake, and Resident Evil Village, so I do have a bit of experience with the series going all the way back to 1998. With that experience, I compiled all of my shitty opinions into this little video just for you. So let's take a look. Alright, so here we go. This is a pretty simple tier list for my first ranking here. So at the top we have Absolute Perfection, followed by a fantastically great game. Then games that are fun, probably mainly in co-op or in certain situations. Then we have the Rotten Eggs, the Resident Evil games that are not really Resident Evil. And at the very end, games that we've never played. So I think that's probably the first thing we should do. Let's go through the list and find games that I've never actually played for any significant amount of time. First off, we got games that probably wouldn't have made it high on the list anyway, like Umbrella Corps, Resistance, Reverse, Gaiden. I did play a little bit of Survivor. File 2 I've never played. And I think that's about it for the games that I've never touched. Oh, actually, Dark Side Chronicles. I never played that one. I did play the Umbrella Chronicles, though. So you can probably understand what my opinion will be of Dark Side Chronicles based on the Umbrella Chronicles. Alright, so let's start off with the earliest game in the timeline as of right now, and that is Resident Evil 0. Now, is Resident Evil 0 a good game? Yes, but it's not a fantastic one. So personally, I think Resident Evil 0 sits right in this category of being an overall fun experience. It's kind of similar to the remake of Resident Evil, but definitely has a few questionable features, and it's not often people's favorite. Next up, we have the original Resident Evil on the PS1. Now, to say perfection would be kind of accurate because it's like, this is what started the whole thing, but I'm trying to be objective at this point in time. Is it the definitive way to play this game? And I would say, aside from a few memes, not really. It's still a good game, though. I would even say it's a great game, which is why I think it belongs right here. The original Resident Evil is iconic, and if you haven't played it, you definitely should check it out. But, if you can, try the remake of Resident Evil, either on the GameCube or the HD version on PlayStation, Xbox, all that stuff, because that is perfection. That game is insanely scary, well-detailed, and way ahead of its time for when it got released. You definitely need to play the original Resident Evil, especially the remake, if you haven't. Then one of my favorite games of all time, so you know it's already going up here, Resident Evil 2. I mean, come on, that game is just one of the best games I think I've ever played. It is an icon for survival horror. It's like the definitive Resident Evil experience when it comes to those older games. It also introduced us to Leon and Claire. Like, God, Resident Evil 2 is great. Then, of course, we have the Resident Evil 2 remake. I honestly consider this to pretty much be a perfect game, and I mean that literally. This game is perfection. I mean, you got so much content, fantastic graphics, amazing audio, incredible tech. You got so much stuff in this game that's kind of like the fundamentals of survival horror. It is so good, and I honestly think, in my personal opinion, it's better than the original Resident Evil 2. I know you're gonna see that as a common trend. A lot of the remakes, except maybe that one, are just fantastic games that need to be played. I feel so bad starting off with the actual main series, because next up is Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, and this is another game that is almost essentially perfect. I adored this game growing up. I played the hell out of it, and it was actually my introduction to Resident Evil as a whole. Even today, thinking about running from Nemesis is still scary when it comes to that particular version. The remake, not so much. I would say, this is where it gets hard. I don't know if I would classify it as a great game. It is a very solid game, and it plays very well. Its mechanics are good, and it was a fun platinum. But compared to Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, it's definitely not as good as the original. But is it Resident Evil 0 levels of mid? For now, I'm going to be nice, and I'm going to place it right here. But that could change. I don't hate Resident Evil 3 Remake. It's just not Resident Evil 2 Remake. Next up, we have Code Veronica. Now, I actually haven't played enough of this game to give it like a full review. It very well could belong all the way up here, or even right here, but the only thing I remember about Code Veronica when I did play it, and keep in mind I was quite young, was it's just extreme difficulty, and I tended to get stuck like quite a bit. So I don't really have a lot of personal experience with the game, and rather than put it in never played though, like I definitely think it probably belongs higher. But from what I remember, I think right now Code Veronica sits about there. But it's probably better than this. I will tell you, it is probably much better than this. Talk to an expert on that one, because I don't know. Next up is Resident Evil 4. I can already hear people clicking off of this video. Is this the part where you think I'm going to go, oh, it's horrible, it's the worst. Resident Evil 4 is a bad game. No, not at all. Resident Evil 4 is not a bad game. Resident Evil 4 is a fun game. It is even a great game. Is it perfection? No. And here is my reasoning. So Resident Evil 4 is a fantastic game that did pioneer the over-the-shoulder, like 3D gameplay that we know from the modern Resident Evils. But because of that, it's also the game that started to shift focus into games like Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6. It's also a game that I find that mechanically has not aged super well. There are people that will definitely disagree with me. They'll think the stopping and aiming and shooting is still perfect. They'll think, not being able to dodge or parry is part of the experience. But after playing the masterpiece that is Resident Evil 4 Remake, I'm sorry, I just have to give it to the remake over the original. And I know with Resident Evil 2, I gave it to both of them, but that's because they are honestly perfect for the types of games they are. Resident Evil 5. I have platinumed Resident Evil 5 so many times. I actually think I've platinumed this game probably about 5 times now because I've gone through it with multiple friends. And the whole time I've complained and said it is not an RE game. It's not even a super great game. But that is not true. It's not true. It is a good game. It is a very fun game, especially playing co-op. And I think overall Resident Evil 5 is a good game. It's just not a good Resident Evil. And that's why I'm going to be putting it down in the fun area, because it is a fun game to play. But as far as Resident Evil goes, it's just not a good one. Resident Evil 6. The one thing we have to thank you for is Resident Evil 7, which is almost perfection. This game is the closest to going back to what Resident Evil really was in that first installment. It is an absolutely incredible game and definitely worth playing. I personally think the switch to first person was well warranted, and it did a great job at immersing you in the Resident Evil world. And I kind of feel bad because I think Resident Evil 7 overall will become like a black sheep of the family. It's going to become this game where we've really only got one game that will feel like Resident Evil 7. And I know Village, which is coming up next here, kind of keeps that Resident Evil 7 vibe, but it's just, I think that one essential place, being in that one Baker estate, just gave Resident Evil 7 this, like, Hills Have Eyes kind of feel that I don't think we're going to see again. And that's kind of really sad. So Resident Evil 7, phenomenal. Village is almost just as good, but there's a few things that kind of hold it back, in my opinion, from kind of reaching the heights of 7. But I will say, the Dollhouse. The Dollhouse alone almost wants me to put it right here. That was the first time I think I've actually been scared by Resident Evil since the first time I saw Lisa Trevors. So, yeah, that is, that's something. But, having said that, I think overall the experience still sits right in this category of being a great game. And now I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, I should probably readjust some of this, because like Resident Evil 4 is probably the top tier of this set. Like, it is still fantastic. I feel so bad for putting it down here, but I really do think the remake is better. I think I'm okay with that for now. Alright, we'll move on. Resident Evil Revelations. This came in a time, I think it was somewhere between 5 and 6 when this came out. Maybe it was right after 6. But this felt like a return to Resident Evil again. and overall was a fantastic game. And I really enjoyed that one. That one felt pretty cool to play, and I actually played it on the 3DS. So yeah, it was pretty good. Revelations 2, I didn't really get the same vibe as the first one. I thought some of its mechanics were a bit strange, but overall, like, it was a fun game to play, especially with friends. So that's why I'm going to kind of pop it right down there. I'm also going to say the same thing about Resident Evil Outbreak. I did play this one back in the day. I don't think I actually played online. I can't remember. I think it had a single player mode. I do remember playing it though, so if it was online only, then I must have played online. But I do remember playing a bit of it, being a little bit confused, a little bit disappointed, because I didn't really understand at the time what kind of game it was trying to be. I was pretty young when that one actually came out, but I did like it, and years later, I did tons of research on it, and I think it's such a cool game, and I think it's probably the more proper approach to how Resident Evil should do multiplayer instead of something like Umbrella Corps. Next, we have the Mercenaries 3D. I actually played the hell out of this game. I actually like it quite a bit. I don't think it deserves to be up here with the other like super notable games in the series, but it was really fun doing Mercenaries mode with friends. I used to love just playing as Hunk and just killing enemies over and over and over again. It was so much fun. But the one thing that really sucks is that you actually can't delete your save file, and once you've made progress to beat the game, there's not really much else to do. So once you 100% it, that's it. It's just done. So not much to say. It's fun. Mercenaries is always fun, but yeah, it's not top tier. Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City. This is where I struggle, because I only ever played through this game once, and it wasn't like unplayably bad. It wasn't one of these games where you're just like, oh my god, this game is horrible. It was fun with friends. It really, really was. But I probably wouldn't go back to it. So I sit in this category of like, I think it's probably fair to just say it's not traditional Resident Evil. It doesn't feel like Resident Evil. And it's just, yeah, it probably belongs right there. Resident Evil Survivor, God, just watch any video on Resident Evil Survivor. You will understand why it belongs here. It's a light gun game and not a very good one. Yeah. Resident Evil Deadly Silence on the DS. I think I'm going to pop this right about here, because it's a remake of the original Resident Evil, but for the DS. And it's overall good. I mean, if you like the original Resident Evil, it's a fine game, but it does some very strange things with its control scheme, and I can't remember if it had a lot of performance issues or not, but it was not the best way to experience the original Resident Evil. Go play the remake. Then we have the Umbrella Chronicles. I'm kind of torn, because like it's a fun game, but I don't know, it's not really what I would want from Resident Evil. It's kind of hard to decide, honestly, but I'm gonna say, you know, it keeps the themes, it keeps the characters. I mean, it's a light gun game, it's designed to be that way. I think it goes right here. And the last one is Resident Evil Dead Aim. I actually like this game. I know everybody's gonna be like, what the fuck? I played it with the light gun, okay? And I played it with a friend. So we were going around and we were, doing all the puzzles together. We were, I was doing the actual, like, shooting, and he was doing all the walking around, solving puzzles. I actually think it's a pretty good game. Like, one that's fun with friends. It's not a super great Resident Evil, but it's definitely better than something like Survivor or Operation Raccoon City. So now that we got all the games on the board, do I shift them around? Do I move them anywhere? Is anything out of order? The one game that I still keep coming back to saying I feel bad for is Resident Evil 4. I know a lot of people will say it deserves to be here. And I understand why. Like 1,000,000%, I understand why. But I just think it's overshadowed by the remake. I really, really do. I'd still say it's like the top tier of great games, though. It is like sitting in this weird middle class. But yeah, overall, I think I'm okay with this. I'm not going to really say like, oh, Resident Evil 1's the best one, yada yada. It's just a generalization. These games are the games that define Resident Evil for me. This is what I want to see with Resident Evil going forward. So yeah, I think that's about it. So yeah, let me know what your guys' top 3 Resident Evil games are down in the comments section below. I really appreciate you guys sticking around to the end of the video, and I will see you guys all next time.